Hi, Craig.
Hey, Craig.
Hi,
Hi,
Craig.
Craig.
Hey, Craig.
Hello, and welcome back to the Paddock. We are the Paddock Girls, and on today's episode, we are going to be talking about all things Miami Grand Prix. And on the call today, we have myself, Hannah, Ito, Amy, Drea, and Melissa. And now I'm going to pass it on to the lovely Ito to talk about practice.
Well, practice was fun, especially as a Ferrari girly, because Charles topped the read all three practice sessions, and it gave us hope. Let's just say that, but I'll say no more because we'll cover the rest in the race recap.
It definitely gave us hope for us Ferrari and Mercedes fans because I remember in FP1, both Mercedes drivers actually came out on top, and I remember waking up to that news and I was like, yes, let's go, a little change up. But then that quickly started to change FP3, excuse me, for Lewis because he kept on complaining about his front wheels constantly like locking up, a lot of like sliding and everything. And overall, like FP3 was just kind of chaotic because drivers were losing grip at certain turns and causing a lot of yellow flags. So, we love a little drama, but it was worrisome at some points.
I do have to say that comparing practice to quali to actual race day, if free practice had been what race day was, I would have been totally fine with that. Was it expected? No, but it's just so interesting to see how different each round of race weekend is with these cars.
Especially because, as Amy said, the results were from the practices were so different than to the actual race, indicating that a lot of teams have a good one-lap speed, but let's be frank, only one team has the race distance speed.
And then going from free practice, we go into one of the more exciting parts of the weekend qualifying. As you know, it's in 3 sessions, and each session definitely brought out something new and exciting. In the first session, we had a little bit of issues, particularly, again, Mercedes and Lewis. His front wing actually hit a wall due to having to avoid hitting K-Mag in the Haas. The FIA did investigate a little bit further into that incident and decided that nothing needs to be done just because, quote, no further action needed to be done due to both drivers not in on an in lap, and K-Mag actually had another slower driver in front of him, end quote. So they determined nothing else needed to be done. You know how FIA can be with their decisions and everything, so we'll just leave that at that. But then of Q1, the drivers that were out, unfortunately, both McLarens were out, along with Yuki. The shocker, Lance Stroll was out too, along with Logan. So it brought definitely an interesting start and a heartbreaking one for all of us around. And then we go into another exciting session, Q2. Our boy Carlos went into full Latino mode, as he stated, and was closely behind Max during the start of the session. Mercedes still continued to keep up with their pace and had constant comments from Lewis in particular that he was sliding around. Again, the whole lack of grip because of the track itself caused a lot of problems for them. And then again, there was another incident with Haas that there was an unsafe release as Fernando was pulling into the pit lane, and again, FIA decided not to do anything further. And then from Q2, drivers that were knocked out: Alex Albon, Nico Hulkenberg, Lewis, the big shocker, and Zhou. And then that brought us into the last one, Q3.
Q3, it was going pretty well. Max did make a mistake on his first couple of laps, so he decided to take a break. And then whenever he came out to take his actual flying lap, Charles crashed in the same place that he had crashed in FP3. So he crashed in the last minute and a half of quali 3, which means that they did not have enough time to go back out, do an out lap to warm up their tires again, and then do their flying lap. So they just red flagged it. We get this wild starting line for this race. So Checo got P1, Alonso got P2, Carlos got P3, K-Mag, Haas got P4, Pierre Gasly got P5, George Russell Mercedes is down in P6, Charles, a Ferrari, again, he got P7, where he crashed. A little sad, but that one. SE Bestie got P8. Matt got P9. Our front runner, the man who has been winning, got P9. So it's going to be interesting tomorrow. Botas got P10. Alex got P11. And Nico Hulkenberg got P12. So that means both Haas's were actually up there. They're not last. Lewis got P13. That one was shocking. Joe got P14. Nick DeVries got P15. Sweet Baby Lando got P16. Yuki got P17. Lance got P18. Oscar P19. Our fellow American Logan got P20, which is heartbreaking. It was going to be a wild one.
What I want to know with the podium starters, was this the first time that we had an all Hispanic Latino podium lockout? In the famous words as J-Lo, mi gente Latino. Love seeing that. Had a lot of pride seeing my fellow Latino Hispanics representing and having a great start to a very fun weekend.
You are correct. That is our first full Latin lockout. I love it. I also have to say, I seriously did not have Kevin Magnussen in P4 on my Formula One bingo card for this season. I loved it. I love when we get to see K-Mag shine a little bit because you don't see it too frequently. Like, you get the odd race where he's just like up in like 6, P9, okay? P4. I mean, it's just, you never know with him, and it's fan-frickin-tastic.
Especially because Hulkenberg actually has been outperforming him lately. I must say, I was a Mick Schumacher girly. May his seat rest in peace. But it irked me. Seeing K-Mag actually perform in quali was amazing to see.
So speaking of fun surprises, we got to see Valtteri Bottas and his Alfa Romeo finally make it into Q3. And fun fact, that is actually the first time that an Alfa Romeo comes into Q3 for the first time, the start of the season. So we love that for him. And we can't wait to see how much farther they can go in. And then from an exciting qualifying session, we go into even more exciting race today. In typical Miami American fashion, we had an interesting pre-race driver introduction. Do we love it? Do we hate it? I personally enjoyed it. It did, yes, feel over the top. But again, it's Miami. It's America. As saying goes, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. So, you know, we welcome open arms and everything. But during the driver's introductions, will.i.am was conducting an orchestra during that time. I really didn't find it that bad. But fun fact, that is actually a new song that he released with Lil Wayne called Formula. And in that song, Lil Wayne's rap, he mentions Lewis being like, go and everything. And then, you know, throw some love to Max Verstappen as well, to being the world driver champion. So really loved that moment when I heard the song. I was like, wait, I know this song. It sounds familiar. And how can we not forget LL Cool J doing the actual introductions? He did a little description of every single driver and they all came out. I wish they were more hyped. At least he did not get the mispronunciations of any of the drivers. So love that he actually did it correctly.
And I don't know if anybody else caught Will Buxton being Will Buxton. And when he introduced will.i.am, he said, welcome, will.i.am. Dramatic pause in Will Buxton fashion. I am Will. Because it's Will Buxton, and of course he's going to find some way to sneak some snarky Brit commentary in there and be himself and make it a little bit about him.
I mean, speaking of Brits, I was actually watching the race with a bunch of European friends. They were all like, the pre-race show, this does not belong in Formula One. What is this? Like, I had to explain to them the whole tradition of walk-on music, names being called out, basically being hyped up and everything. And they're like, this is not fun. This is not what Formula One's about. I'm like, you guys are in the States. It's fine. And it was also funny that only Logan and Lewis kind of knew what they were doing.
I think in order for the drivers to have understood what was happening and how they needed to come out hyped for this, either to have shown them like a football game where they introduce everyone, or like WWE, so at least they know like, okay, you don't have to be this hyped, but you need to at least do a little bit more than just walk out here. shoulders slumped, just be like waving like a little bit more.
I definitely feel like they needed a little dress rehearsal, a little run through of each person getting called out so they know how to walk out with that, that personality, that vibe, that swag that we all would love to see.
Maybe take a lesson from Danny Rick. I don't know if y'all have ever seen him be very hype when he comes out, especially in Austin. Maybe a little lesson or two.
Or even, like, all they needed to do was also to show them, like, college baseball teams walkout for, like, a championship game. Those guys get so hype and so swaggy. It's fantastic. All they needed was just some inspiration. Give them if anybody's seen on TikTok, the Savannah Bananas. Show them some TikToks and you would have been golden.
I think Lando almost had it whenever he came out, whenever he was doing like a cool swaggy walk. But then I realized he might have just been avoiding the fog that they were blasting out. So that one, I almost had hope for him. And then the others, some of them, they cut them off with their entrance. So maybe they did do it and we just didn't see it because then they went to the orchestra and I couldn't tell what they were doing. And I was like, wait a second, who did they just announce? Because I missed it. And then they just show their face as they're already lined up.
I don't know about you guys, but I am going to be stalking the team's social media accounts, hoping that one of the admins posts each driver's full walkout, because I feel like some of them definitely had some things were a little bit there. We just didn't get to see because F1 TV decides to only give us little bits.
Yeah, I mean, sorry to bring Lewis up again, but to Amy's point that F1 TV only gives you certain aspects, I feel like he got announced and then we just saw him hugging, and that was it. And I'm like, it would have been nice to see what led to the hug. I mean, I'm assuming that the hug meant that they're friends. I would have loved to see his walkout because clearly he kind of knew what he was doing.
And so after that very fun introductions by LL Cool J and Will I Am, or I Am Will, it brought us to a very exciting, or maybe not so exciting start to the race. Right straight off the lights out, we saw that Checo actually had a pretty strong start to the race, but then we had a small incident right at turn one, in between Nick DeVries and Lando Norris, where Nick actually had a lockup and it caused him to hit Lando right from behind of his car, and then that caused them to fall down quite a few spots in the grid from to 19 and P20. So that was just kind of a little dramatic start, fun start, if you want, to the race.
Yeah, but I mean, I feel like I remember seeing the smoke from one of the cars and I was like, oh cool, something interesting is happening. But then nothing really happened. And from then on, even though you think with Max sitting in P9 to start, you think there was some racing action going on, he was in P1 at lap 21. So I was like, come on, this is boring. So that's why I feel like I was able to focus more so on like the midfield. And what surprised me about the midfield truly was Alpine. It's actually funny because if you guys might recall on the episode we released on Friday, I was like, Alpine's going to have an interesting race. And lo and behold, they did. Esti Bestie was riding in P3 on occasion. And also Pierre, even though he qualified 5th and sometimes would go up to 4th, sadly, he ultimately ended at P8, but with Esti in P9, which, given the fact that Esti Bestie was in P3 at certain points, was just sad.
Speaking of fun midfield action, as Ito was talking about, I want to know what was in that Haas engine today. They were putting up a fight against Ferraris, the Mercedes, anyone just basically around them, that anytime like Charles would try to overtake, I believe it was either Nico or Kevin. I cannot recall now, but anytime like he would try to like jump over one of them, it would just be like, "Oh, you thought so," and then they would take it over. And Lewis was having the same issue for a while. So again, good for them for putting up that fight and coming in strong. But I would have loved, like, I just want to know.
Yeah, I don't know what kind of pixie dust Haas put in K-Mag's car. He really impressed me. Beyond words, I just never thought I would hear the words, "A Haas has overtaken a Ferrari." I think I heard them say that twice the entire race. And I don't think anybody would have ever expected to hear those words in a Formula One race.
Especially because at the start, Kevin was hunting down Carlos in P3 with Kevin in P4. And then later on in the race, Kevin was putting the pressure on Charles at the same time. And I was like, is it Hunt the Ferrari days for Haas? Did their Chipotle bowls that they ate in some promotional videos this weekend really help them? What is going on? Do they just need more Chipotle?
I don't know what they put in that Chipotle bowl then, but all I know is Chipotle had some special, if they made it to the points, it was like free burritos. And from what I saw on social media, those free burritos ran out quicker than Max Verstappen in P1 finishing out the race. So that says a lot. So we'll see what happens with that. Maybe Chipotle really was just like, let's go, Haas, let's show them what we can do. And they really stepped out and showed out. And I was living for that too.
I was kind of weirded out when they announced the whole Chipotle sponsorship thing, but hey, it works.
So one of the funnier moments that I heard during the race was at one point Max over the radio asked to be told when he would have to be like pitting into the garage, and like some other details, and his engineer, who I thought was actually Horner speaking to him, was just like, no, just focus on racing. Kind of like a little cute dad moment in there, because I was just like, yes, like go ahead, tell him to just relax and focus on the race, because there's nothing else really to focus on.
To your point, it gave me, I think it was it was Jeddah, where he asked about the fastest lap point because he was in P2, and the engineer was like, you just focus on racing. And he's like, I care.
For anybody who does not know, Max Verstappen's race engineer's name is Giampiero Lambiase, and he sounds like Christian Horner. It's creepy. Our YouTube videos comparing the two of them, half the time at the end of a race, I can't tell which one's talking, but it confuses so many people, especially if you're new to Formula One. I promise you that is not Christian Horner talking to Max Verstappen the entire race. He does not have time for that.
It is so true, especially because usually at the end, like after the race engineer's done talking to Max after he like won or placed or whatever, Christian actually comes on the radio and says good race, and then you're just sitting there very confused because you're like, wait, has Christian been talking to him this entire time, or am I hearing things?
I think that's really just our untrained ears trying to differentiate the accent to an actual voice, because we're so used to hearing our American accents, other than like maybe Crofty or someone.
I don't know if anybody else remembers that Fernando yesterday during post-quali interviews was asked to give a prediction on when Max was going to potentially overtake him. He predicted lap 25. My personal favorite thing this whole entire race, and if you notice on the cooldown room, Max even called him out on it. He overtook him on lap 15, and it's just kind of cute that people have started asking Fernando for his predictions, because for most of the races, he's been pretty accurate in terms of either predict in-race drama or an overtake or anything, and I just love that this is now becoming a constant theme. And I'm personally team making this a series of Fernando's predictions, so we just kind of get this the whole season. So it's just very interesting to see how right or wrong he can be.
I mean, especially since in Jeddah, he was right. He got asked the same thing. When will Max overtake you? He said lap 25. lo and behold, it was lap 25.
So I have officially become number one band leader of the Team Fernando within the Paddock Girls, it seems. But I love that he was watching the race on the big screen while driving, is just sitting there like the proud big brother and checking in on how Lance is doing and actually caring. Again, with the caring Fernando, he was never like this before he went to Aston Martin. So there's definitely something in the water over there that has changed that man for the better. And I am absolutely loving it.
I think it's definitely Aston Martin because even though, like, when you think about Seb, he was carrying at Ferrari. But because he had Kimi as like a sounding board, he was a bit more fun still. He wasn't Red Bull Seb, but he wasn't Aston Save the Planet Seb just yet either. And Aston Martin, he became Save the Planet, Saved Bee Seb. So I definitely think, Amy, you are correct. It's definitely the water at Aston Martin.
At one point in the race, also, George had brought up, like, who is that in front of me? And I guess they assumed it was Max or Fernando. And they're like, we're that close to him? And somebody was like, oh, no, wait. That was actually a back marker. Never mind. Because most of that race, Max was probably, for some of it was 16. Most of it was like 15 point something seconds ahead of everyone. So I wonder, his race had to have been lonely just with the back markers and lapping them. I should probably go watch the onboardings for the top 3 to see what they actually saw. They were not close at all. Red Bull really was running away with it.
And then, of course, we go to the saddest part of our Sunday Fun Days, the end of the race. Our podium looked like this. And no surprise, P1 was Mr. Max Verstappen. P2, Sergio Perez, and P3, Fernando Alonso.
Whenever they won and they were putting their cars in Parc Ferme, did anyone else notice that Max actually got tugged back into his seat because he forgot to disconnect his water tube? And then he was like looking around like, what is that? And he was like, oh, he disconnected it. And then Checo was already out and walking away. So he hurried up and was like, take a picture real quick and then let me go put down my helmet. And then for Alonso, I love the Aston Martin green. Don't get me wrong. Love it. The thing is, when he got out of that car, you can really tell how much work their bodies did in Miami with the humidity and in that heat because it was soaked in sweat. It really showed all his sweat stains. I loved the color, but it really showed how hard they worked compared to the Red Bulls. There's dark navy and it just doesn't show up as well. So you couldn't really tell how well they were sweating in those ones.
I think this was the first race all season so far that we've really seen how much work and energy and effort these guys put in these races. Because even comparing how he looked post-race in Baku, where it's pretty hot, is nowhere near as bad as how he looked when he got out of that Aston Martin P3 at the end of this race. It showed everything. It is the most unforgiving color I think I've ever seen.
The Ferraris, whenever Charles got out of his car and was taking off his helmet, he looked so red in his face and his hair was so sweaty. And then you see our Latin king Carlos come up and he looked fine. He looked supermodel good with his hair. Charles literally looked like he ran a marathon. He was so sweaty.
One thing we know for sure about Charles is that he definitely ran to the bathroom after all the water that he drinks pre-race. I know that for sure because he's our hydration king and I love that.
We can also always count on Carlos Hot Chili Pepper signs to always look good. The minute that man pulls off a balaclava, he looks perfect. Without fail, every single solitary race. This race weekend in particular, that man was next level. He looked fantastic. Miami seriously agrees with him. If he ever wanted to move to the States, I would be immediately telling him that he needs to move to Miami because it just works.
Yeah, and one thing to note is, which weird, and I don't know how y'all feel about it, but this race had no yellow, no red flags, no safety cars, no car retirements, no DNFs, no nothing, which was an interesting change. I don't know if that's good or bad.
I mean, it definitely didn't help make this race any less boring, if you will. And I thought Baku had that title on lock after last weekend.
I decided after the race to do a little bit of digging and see when the last race we had that there was no DNFs, no safety cars, no red flags, no nothing. And the last race was the Turkish Grand Prix in 2021. And that was the last time that this has ever happened. I have to say, I'm surprised it was actually that soon or that recent. I would have expected it to be back in like 90s, not 2021. Feel like 2021 and on, every race in my head always had a DNF or something. I know we talked about in the predictions and the recap from last year's race. Our last episode, we all talked about the helmets and how we could not stand the helmets. This year, they gave us jerseys. Not really sure how I feel about the jersey concept. Definitely like it a lot better than the helmets. I really still just don't know if it's exactly what I had in mind for the memorabilia for the race.
I, for one, definitely liked the jerseys. I love the colors. I like that they did the whole Miami Dolphins color scheme and it complemented the whole theme together with the Miami GP. What I'm wondering is, did they have jerseys made for each driver in general? Or how did they do that? Because they had the three all set and ready to go.
Yeah, I'm actually glad you brought that up because our side note, some of our paddock girls are actually at the Miami GP this weekend and got an insider scoop to let us know that all those jerseys were sitting and ready to go to hand out to all the drivers. So they were all pre-made.
Damn, how? Because especially because they had the numbers 1, 2, 3 and the like accurate names on top of the number. How many jerseys did they actually have to make? Like, were they like, Logan's not going to podium, so we don't need to do any jerseys for him? Like, did they pick and choose who to pre-make jerseys for, or did they just do it like 20 times 3 options, so 60 jerseys? Did they pre-make 60 jerseys? I hope because from what one's trying to go green, I hope they didn't pre-make 60 jerseys.
Now, if they did make that much jerseys, now we know why the Miami GP tickets costed the amount that they did. It all makes sense now because of the jerseys.
I have a feeling they had it numbered and then they added the names after they were in Parc Fermé and doing the interviews right there so that they would be ready before they got over to where the locker room was. I hope that's what they did, at least, to save ourselves some money for that GP.
I really want to know if these jerseys are they stitched letters? Are they iron-ons? Because if they're iron-ons, that's the more time-efficient way to go about it if you're doing something till the last minute. If you're telling me that they had somebody behind the scenes stitching every single one of those jerseys, hats off to them, because that is an absolute nightmare. I've done it myself and I would not recommend it to a friend.
I don't know. I did end up liking them, and their trophies on the podium, I think, were knockoff Lombardi trophies because they look just like our Super Bowl trophies that we hand out, except it didn't have the football on top, which I thought was pretty cool. I don't know if all the boys watch football, so they may not have gotten that significance, but Danny would have.
I mean, I didn't, because I don't watch football, let's be honest. I didn't catch the reference, but now that you mention it, I was like, what if instead of a football on top, they would have put a race car on top?
I would love to see the trophies with a Formula One race car on top. That would be awesome, but I have to agree, I really don't think any of those boys would have much of a clue of what the Lombardi trophy actually looks like. Annie, sure. Logan, obviously. Maybe Valtteri Bottas, potentially. I really don't see most of the grid having any idea what that would look like. I personally, throughout the whole post-race celebration, loved Fernando Alonso. He just was so happy and along for the ride, and per usual, spraying the team and as this ritual he seems to be doing every time he podiums, he shares the champagne with everybody, which I love, and I love that they always get content of it. The Aston Martin admin Jimmy always gets us the goods. Without fail, that man will get you grade A content.
So, how do we feel about how the race went overall? I know we made a lot of predictions. I feel like a lot of them did not come true. I think we created more chaos for the race than what the race actually gave us this year. And that's totally fine. Personally, I will no longer be making any predictions because I said I wanted a Lando podium, and first lap in off the starting line, he got tapped, and then he finished in the lower half of the grid and didn't get any points. So for now on, I'm not making any predictions. I'm just going to let everything be, and we're just going to go with fate. Also, I'm wondering if Red Bull purposely put their drivers on different tire strategies, knowing that Checo's in P1 and Max would be able to catch up to the front and be a front runner from his P9 position by the end of the race, so that they technically would not have to call driver orders.
But at the same time, is it like, would they call driver orders at such an early race? Like, at this point, at least I hope, it would, like, it's still everyone's championship. But who knows? It's Red Bull. And at the same time, as we saw with Brazil last year, they tried calling team orders, and Max did not budge. So maybe this time Checo wouldn't have budged.
I don't know about y'all, but same thing as Drea, my predictions did not go as I planned either. I was really hoping for our Florida loving US boy Logan to be in the points and finally score his first F1 points in his home race, and unfortunately that did not happen. And then it looked like what caused him to get all the way down to P20 was the fact that he had a obnoxiously long pit stop. I believe it was about 30-second range, which we know that is not good in the F1 world, and that caused him to just stay where he was throughout the rest of the race.
I mean, that man didn't budge from P20, which is just sad. Because remember, Australia, Oscar's home race, he scored his first points. So we were definitely hoping for some Logan points. And meaning he's still at 0 points, especially because he only has a year-long contract. I feel like if he does not start scoring soon, he will be out of a seat.
Like everybody else, was so sad to not see our favorite Florida man get some points at his home race. But I was so impressed with Kevin Magnussen, like I know I've said before. But he kept his elbows out and gave it everything he had, which I just love to see. And I know when we mentioned in our predictions episode, we all talked about how McLaren kept telling everybody that their car was so suited for Miami. And I saw none of it. I saw none of it. I am not a McLaren fan, but watching them just stay at the back of the pack just hurt my heart for Lando and for Oscar, because you want to see all the cars able to compete, and McLaren just seems to have built a tractor this year.
Yeah, and I, for one, am not making any more predictions ever again when it comes to races, because that was pretty sad to watch. And while we love to talk about all things F1, we do like to end our episode with a little fun quote, fun fact. And today, we have our lovely Melissa with a funny driver quote to end the race.
Not necessarily a funny driver quote, but it was a funny driver moment during the race where Fernando just goes over the radio and asks his engineer what position Lance was in, and then just complimented his move in turn one. Shows that this man was coasting in P3, enjoying life, and got the time to just watch the midfield and feel of the race on one of the screens. Is that really safe? Probably not. But again, the fact that he was just coasting along in his position, was comfortable enough to do that, really. And again, just showing that Aston Martin teamwork, makes dream work vibe that he's really supportive of Lance and, just wants the best for him at the end.
And that's a wrap on our Miami race recap. And as always, keep up with us on our socials, Paddock Girls Podcast. Unless your Twitter, something a little extra special, they are the Paddock Girls Pod. And just a little reminder, if you haven't already checked out our socials, you will see a few of our Paddock Girls attending the Miami GP this weekend and or this past weekend, depending on when you're watching. Thanks for joining us in the paddock. See you at next race. Bye, Craig.
Hi, Craig.
See ya,
Bye,
Craig.
Craig.
Bye, Craig.